All right, Chris. This is episode 26 and everybody might notice that we've pushed it back a couple of days this week, so that we could let any news that might shake out, which news wise was a good call because there have been some things that have happened. I don't know if anybody's heard, but we can enlighten them. Um, so let's jump right in. Um, 5 seconds before we started, we were talking about the storms a blowing in on the horizon. Um, I guess we have to. I guess we have to just talk about what everybody else is talking about. The Trump conviction. Quick hot take. What's your quick hot take that nobody's going to agree with you, maybe, or few people are going to agree with you, but it's how you see it. It's the reality that you see.
Democrats still haven't learned their lessons from 2016.
Okay, that's a quick hot take. Now elaborate. I'm very curious what that means.
Sure. So I don't think there is a human being on the planet that didn't look at the evidence and say, of course Trump paid off a fucking porn star to shut her up. I don't think anybody
Right.
doubted that for 1 second. And it goes back to the
Yeah.
Hillary.
It seems on brand. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it's just like, that's who the guy is. This is the grab him by the pussy guy.
Right.
And the idea that it is all. So going back to 2016, and the entire Hillary campaign was based on the premise of Orange Man bad, that Donald Trump is a bad person. And the public went, of course he is. We know who this fucking guy is. This guy has been in the tabloids for 30 years. We know he's a bad guy. We know he's had multiple wives. We know he has affairs. We know, there's a mountain of evidence, and it wasn't germane because, again, I go back to my baseline is that voters ask very rationally, what's in it for me? And being a bad person isn't necessarily a disqualifier. And so if the Democrats want to litigate out he's a bad person, good fucking luck with that. It's 2016. And it's how this case is a bad person. Cheating on your taxes, stealing from the poor box, a fraudulent charity. People go, that sucks. You are a terrible person, and maybe that does disqualify you because it means you don't care about people like me or people that are below you. Saying that I paid money to a sex worker so my wife and my business wouldn't find out about it. I would like a list of New York real estate moguls who didn't pay off a sex worker. But again, not to make light of it. And yeah, okay, 34 felonies. Yeah, I get it. I mean, it's terrible, but the whole case was kind of weak to begin with, and it kind of stunk that, it was a charge that was a misdemeanor, that it expired, that the DA brought back as a felony based on a novel legal theory that this crime was used to set up another crime, but they never specified the other crime. And, I think it says how incompetent Trump's legal team is, that how you couldn't blow that up in 20 fucking seconds is beyond me. But apparently they didn't. They had a chance to blow it up. And whatever the really good looking lawyer he had for a while was, that was her case. And she blew this case originally. And was it the sexual harassment case or whatever it was? Was it assault? Yeah. I forget what it was, but the $200 million thing or 400, whatever the fuck it was. But like she was in charge of both.
The defamation.
Right. And so ultimately, I think it goes back to Orange Man bad, and Trump is a bad person because who would go have sex with a porn star while their wife is pregnant? And it's like, you got to be a scumbag. But we know that. We know he's not a, you know, that's who Donald Trump is. I mean, that's on brand. Contrast this to 2020 when Biden ran against him and they didn't do Orange Man bad as the thrust of the campaign. It was that Donald Trump fucked up COVID, period. And it was his policies that fucked shit up, not that he was personally bad. And again, I think the Biden campaign is like what's worse, paying off a porn star or not acknowledging your illegitimate granddaughter. I think they're both pretty despicable things. I'd probably go with paying off the porn star is worse, but I think it's worse by a matter of degrees. And to say, well, one's legal, one's not, kind of misses the point. It's litigation in the echo chamber, you know? And so anyway, that's the hot take.
I have a slight question about that. So, first of all, I mean, at its core, I agree with you. I don't think anybody cares about. I think pretty much people believe that if you run for office, you're just automatically a scumbag. Like that's kind of the expectation.
You have to prove you're not a scumbag.
Right. It's you have to prove the opposite, right? But I think one of the interesting things, and this is really not a statement, it's truly a question for you. The interesting thing for me is the degree to which he has subverted, co-opted the evangelical political right, who talk in nothing but moralities and godliness. I mean, I spent last week at the Texas Republican Convention, and the fervor for religious morality in American politics, while at the same time saying that his base knows he's a scumbag. Mm-hmm. I think it's almost as if they love him as a devil and they love him as a savior. So they love him that he's a scumbag. They love that he does nothing but make liberals cry and that he wants to bring in autocracy. They like literally get off on it. While at the same time, I saw a book on Amazon the other day that declared that Donald Trump is the Son of Man and Jesus was the Son of God, and that he's ushering in a new.
If you don't put that, if you don't put that in the notes link, if you don't put that link in the fucking episode notes, I'm never going to do this again because I'm going to buy it. I'm going to buy it and give it out for Christmas.
All right, I'm going to put it in there. But truthfully, to me, that is laughable, but it is believed by so many people in his base that it ceases to be funny and it becomes something that I can't square that circle. So you say it's like, we know Orange Man bad. We know that. We voted for him because of that, or in spite of that, maybe. But I would say because of it. Does not square with what they claim to be their worldview and who he is. He is the Son of Man. He's coming to save us. Yeah. So it's a question phrased as a statement, I guess. How do you square that circle?
Yeah, and it's a great statement, and it kind of goes to the heart of one of the hardest things to do in electoral politics, and something I stumbled off of for frankly the first half dozen years of my career, is that trying to square that circle. And the answer is, don't expect rationality, Aristotelian rationality from voters. Expect enlightened self-interest. And so if you think somebody is going to do good by you, you will imbue them with all the qualities that you think are good. The America's famous for electing scoundrels, for whether it be Marion Barry or Edwin Edwards, or I'm sure there's other great historical, figures that were kind of.
Who I liked was James Trafficant, that congressman from Ohio.
With that hair, I mean, yeah, but he was like, They used to call he's part of the Whig Party. Um, the but so and that's the way people are. I mean, it's just like, I mean, if you think of it, like sports teams, it's, I'm wearing my Florida Panthers sweatshirt today because I root for that team, because I like one of the players on there is my favorite player. They are undeniably edgy and dirty. I mean, that's kind of what they are. They're chippy. They're and a lot of that's just kind of the league and kind of the playoffs. But when I see an announcer say, "Well, that was a cheap, should have been a penalty," and I'm like, "What? F you!" That's, I'm screaming at the TV, and my guys can do no wrong, kind of thing, because it's my team, and Trump is their team, and you can't ascribe logic to it. I mean, think of it in the sports thing. You give your team passes for bad behavior, for bad play, for, yeah, well, sure, he was drunk and beat up a bouncer, but that's just kind of like, that's his competitive nature, whatever the fuck you want to make up. So that's the first part of it. And, actually that was the second part of it. And the first part of it is that it is kind of who you say you are with what versus what you want. And, I mean, it is illogical. And trying to square that, when you ask people in polling, are you concerned about the deficit? And they say, yeah, I'm concerned about the deficit. I'm concerned about higher taxes. And what do you want? More services, right? And that can't be squared either. And that's, people think their taxes are too high. People think other people's taxes aren't high enough, and people want services that they don't want to pay for. And again, the pieces don't fit. But it's more of an indication, I think, of human nature than a particular demographic. But yeah, I mean, I get it. I mean, and you see that the tensions that currently creates fissure. I think you're seeing a little bit, with Biden and, leftward voters, Palestinian supporters. And, at the end of the day, they're all going to come back and they're going to vote for Biden, even though they may not like his Middle East policy. Maybe they don't like his policy for Israel. Or the majority will. Whether there are enough in a specific state like Michigan to push something, that's an open question. But generically, I think it was like 50% now of voters don't like Biden, what Biden's doing in the Middle East. We don't define what that is. We're like, do you like it or not like it? But they're going to come back and vote for him. And again, it's more human nature than politics. But yeah, and it's infuriating. I mean, early on in my career, I'm sitting in focus groups and, saying, how can these fucking people believe that bullshit when, but yeah, I mean, so does it mean something? No. Does it mean something? Maybe. I think that you'll see, is this finally the bridge too far for Trump? I don't think so. Just because you're prosecuting a political opponent based on a technicality. I think that.
Do you think that's fair, that you the political opponent part? I've heard so many people, and I feel like even the so-called left-wing press has allowed people to come on to their programs and echo this is going to blow up, this is going to blow back against the Democrats. And I think it is contributing to the decline of institutions to frame something that I don't even think is accurate, that Donald Trump was indicted by a grand jury because of a cabal of Democrats. Now, do I think that there is selective prosecution? Yeah, absolutely. Just like I can be speeding down the road and I get pulled over, but not the guy next to me who's going the same speed. I get that. There's selective prosecution of everything. But I just feel like we take for fact now, it's being discussed as if it is fact that this was a Democrat action, when it doesn't seem to me to be that is 100% what it was, right? I think there was a belief that a crime had been committed and that they shouldn't let it stand. And I do think that they use their legal creativity to somehow find a way to get that person for the crime. And now you can say, when it goes to appeal, will the appeals court say you were too creative? Maybe, but a grand jury and a jury of his peers found him guilty, indicted him and found him guilty. And I don't believe that New York is all Democrats and only Democrats. I assume that there were at least some Republicans on one of those juries.
Yeah, no.
So I don't see it that way.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think that kind of where I'm stuck by it is that it is almost exactly the same thing, a records offense that Hillary got fined $100,000 for paying for the Steele dossier and calling it legal work or something, and that is also a crime. It is a misdemeanor, and she was, I think, appropriately fined. I don't think the amount was enough, but that's a whole different podcast. But I think raising a misdemeanor to a felony, I think that's the issue for me, that it is selective, because he's the first case they've done that. He's the first case they've done that with. And I think, yeah.
No, I totally see, I could totally see this going to an appeals court and it either be discarded and sent back for a separate trial, or just outright, no, this is not legally available to you to prosecute him in this way. I can totally see that happening. The difference, I would say, yeah.
No. Have we talked about the John Edwards case at all?
We have, and I think this is like, I've heard people talking on Fox News, and I think there's some false equivalence on the legal side. And I'm not a lawyer, but I'm just saying, from what I've understood, listen, I think John Edwards, here's where I stand. I think anybody who breaks the law should be, if charges are pressed and there are enough evidences to convict them, then they are guilty. And regardless of whether or not everyone else does it, or it shouldn't have been, or this is unfair or whatever, it doesn't matter to me. The question I just come back to is, did they commit the crime? Did they have due process? And were they found guilty? And if that's the case, then okay. And I think the issue with John Edwards, I would say, if he committed the crimes, he should be punished. I'm not so sycophantic to believe that anyone should not be punished for what they do. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or a pope. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
So I think the question that, from what I've seen in the understanding of what happened with the Trump trial, is that, let's say he did the exact same thing as John Edwards. He paid, or actually Hillary Clinton maybe is the better example. He labeled something as one thing when it should have been labeled as another. Right? Understand. But what the state of New York said was, what he did on top of that was that he altered his business record. So he committed a second crime in furtherance of the first crime, which made it a felony. So if Hillary had then gone on and had the Clinton Global Initiative alter its business records to hide the fact that she did the first thing so that she could become president, then it would be the same crime. There were two crimes that were committed. One was in furtherance of the first. So I think that there isn't a perfect equivalence between John Edwards and Hillary Clinton and what Donald Trump did. I don't know. What would you say?
I think you need to go a little further into the weeds with it. And again, I think that when they let, and again, it was a misdemeanor. Like when they let the misdemeanor expire, and they came up with a unique and novel and never used on anybody but Donald Trump. Isn't that a coincidence? I think that's a problem. That here's our
Totally
public
agree.
here's our public enemy number one, and we're going to kind of create law here. The furtherance of the second crime, I think is it intent to commit another crime. The other offense was a New York election law statute, and it was it's a conspiracy charge, conspiracy to affect an election, essentially.
Right.
I don't know what the technical wording. I think the technical wording is like prevent or influence or something. And that is a huge stretch, because you could argue that any spend any campaign does is that. I mean, and it's clear that that's not what the statute is. It's a unique interpretation of the statute, because you could argue that Hillary Clinton could be charged with a felony too, because the Steele dossier was. I mean, any spend, which I think, by the way, would be insane. I think it would have been an insane thing to do.
Also, the Steele dossier was initially started under Republicans.
Well,
nobody wants to talk about that.
No, it wasn't, because I saw the initial one. So the initial one.
What do you mean?
So the initial one, and actually I can send you the link. It's kind of interesting. The initial project was a Republican project. I was working for Marco Rubio at the time, and it was an initial project that was basically your baseline votes and quotes and personal stuff about Trump, and most of it wasn't interesting or wasn't actionable. That project got flipped to the law firm, and I can't think of the name of the lawyer now. But it became a different. Then it went to, was it GPS Impact or Global GPS or whatever the GPS firm was, and that's when all the Russian crazy shit came in. I actually read a version of that, and a lot of it's kind of like, this is all insane. But so there was an original project that was your basic opposition research package on Trump, and then it went to another firm, and that project became the Steele dossier. The initial piece wasn't under Steele. And again, I mean, Steele was a guy that worked for Harvey Weinstein and the National Enquirer. I mean, he's a dirtbag. Or not the National Enquirer, but he worked for Harvey. But I'm saying, it was.
I'm certainly not.
So the Republican part of that, again, which I read, was your basic baseline kind of bullshitty, not particularly interesting survey or research package. It didn't become the crazy Russian thing until it went to Steele, and it went through the Democratic law firm, which is, by the way, which was the piece that Hillary was fined for, because they had their lawyer.
Was it a law firm or was it Fusion GPS?
The law firm paid Fusion GPS, and then
got it.
And where the law firm got in trouble and where the fines were is that the law firm said we didn't have anything to do with it, but basically they were laundering money from the Clinton campaign to Fusion, not GPS Impact, Fusion, to Fusion. There's like three major players that were Fusion or GPS, and it's and there was the Karl Rove PAC, there was a top Democratic firm, and then there was the Steele thing, and I'm getting senile. I can't remember all the names anymore. But yeah, so it was a different thing. So,
but I totally understand what you're saying. My whole point is that it did not. People often say that like the Steele dossier, that it was all Democratic generated. And my point is that there's a really great book called Crime in Progress, written by the two guys who own Fusion GPS, and they're reporters who got into this. Reporters are like investigators. What's their name? Peter something. Oh, Glenn Simpson and Peter Fritsch. And now listen, it's their book. They have their own biases, whatever. I read this book. I didn't even know that the original genesis for the initial, what's it called when you opposition research was Republican backed, right? And then once it became clear that he was going to be the nominee, they had already done this work. They stopped their contract. I think it was with the RNC, or maybe it was with a specific candidate, and then the Clinton campaign comes along, and I think it was her law firm that was like, "How do we get this? How do we move forward from this?" But it didn't start here. It started here, and then they took this and they built on it. Is my point. There's a seed here under the Republicans, and which they grow it from.
Yeah, and I think the problem with that logic in the book, and like either reporters, maybe they're investigators or they're mob lawyers, making a torture case for their client.
Yeah.
Every candidate has opposition research packages. I mean, I was working for the Rubio Super PAC. Yeah. They had stuff on us, and so to say it was a unique thing. The thing I had on Hillary was huge. By the way, I'll kind of do a memory lane thing. So I worked for Arlen Specter on a couple of his campaigns, and we wouldn't do a whole lot of opposition research on him because he had been a public figure since the early 1960s, and he had been a member of the Senate since 1980. And I'm going through. So he'd been a member of the Senate for, quarter of a century plus. Anything that you would want to argue he voted one way or another, he did, because you're voting for budget packages. So there's not so he voted against this, he voted for that. Of course, and it was never, and we would litigate out points. But, when you have a long career in politics, you are guilty of every charge because you have to make votes. Unless you abstain, or unless you're like the guy in Kentucky, Massey, where you just vote against everything. You never vote for a budget package. So you're 100% pure. But you can make the case that AOC is a warmonger because she was voting for these defense packages because she just voted for the House budget. But anyway, it was an interesting thing is that we whatever the argument against Specter was, we always assumed it was true, because the idea that you would go back and look at 24 years, that you could go through 24 years of votes in the U.S. Senate and say, oh, no, right here, page 432. I mean, it would have to be, it wouldn't be actionable as a campaign. You couldn't, you couldn't do it. And that was always kind of interesting to do, kind of go through that. Guys that are there for 4 years, 6 years under one party, you can make that case stick,
right?
But you can't. By the way, speaking of age thing, I want to go down a sidebar, which I think is really interesting.
Yes.
That I was spending too much time on X last week. I was watching playoff games, and in between, quarters and periods, I'm going through X. And I kind of stumbled in these kind of whole threads about with Democrats arguing that, the real problem was Reagan and Reagan. And I was struck by 2002, 24. I started going back. And so basically it was, over 40 years, close to half a century since Reagan. And it struck me is how, if you're a normal person, it's like a Republican arguing in 1980 that it's FDR. And how
Chris, I still hear fucking Republicans blaming FDR for today's problems.
And how fucking, and if you're a normal voter, blaming the guy 50 years ago or 100 years ago is fucking insane.
Yeah.
It's
insane.
That fucking Thomas Paine, he's at the root of it, you kind of go like,
yeah.
And you realize that how wacky activists and hyper-partisans are. because it was like, you're arguing,
Right.
like whoever your acquaintance arguing about, was FDR in the second, and and you want to go like, what are you, insane? And it's the same
Right.
thing. It's like when Reagan fired Patco, the air traffic controllers, and you want to go like, what are you? Is there something wrong with you? You know,
Right.
uh,
Right. Right.
there have been 5
I do.
administrations.
I do think. I do think you've touched on an interesting point, though, which is I'm going to take what you said about Orange Man bad, Democrats wanting to run on whether or not somebody's good or bad, and I want to expand that a little bit further because I very much agree with you that that is the wrong. I generally think actually Democrats are really shitty candidates most of the time in politics because there's too much of this like high horse morality shit most of the time. But let me expand on this a little bit. I was listening to, it was like an hour and a half long thing. It was Candace Owens on the Breakfast Club with Charlemagne, a morning radio show.
You're a glutton for punishment. I couldn't take that.
You know, I found it really interesting, and I'm about to tell you why. So
Okay.
they said to her, why are you supporting Trump instead of Biden in the upcoming election? And she said, now this was before she got fired by Ben Shapiro, but she said, well, just look at the economy. Life was better under Trump and blah, 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 blah. And it's, again, I'm not going to expect rationality as if, well, macro environmental conditions have fucking changed. So it isn't just the president. It's not like the president waved the magic wand and said, make everybody's life shitty. But it's just provably and demonstrably not true as well. And the part that isn't true is the way your perception of reality frames it so much. So she said, of course our life is worse now because, and I couldn't vote for Biden because they did things like the stimulus checks and printed all this money and they give you $300, but then the inflation causes everything to cost you way more money than that. And I wanted to throw my computer across the room because it was Trump that did that initially, who gave out the stimmy checks. Like, your reasoning for supporting Trump against Biden is blaming Biden for something Trump did. And to me, it's no different than the fucking idiots that say, well, Obama let 9/11 happen. It's like, you shouldn't be able to vote. First of all, that this is dangerous if you think that that's the reason for vote, that your vote shouldn't count. But it is a deeper look at like you said it. I think politics is way more psychology than math, and people see the world a certain way. This goes back to what I said in a previous episode of ours of like, people give the credit for the way the economy is now. Anything they see good, it's a result of what Trump did. Anything they see that's bad, it's a result of what Biden did, or vice versa, right? So in this situation, it's very hard to be the incumbent. I think there used to be an incumbent advantage, and at least in this current race, Trump gets to benefit from the nostalgia that humans have about the past because he was an incumbent before, while also running as an insurgent where people continuously feel insecure in their own lives in the present. And it's a very hard position to run in as Biden unless he were to stop worrying about being a good president and focus solely on being a good candidate. He could do a lot of things that would make him a good candidate, but it'd be horrible for the country. And I think that's the deeper problem. That's why they're running on he's a threat to democracy, or he's a this, or he's a that, right?
And I think that goes to, the reason nobody believes threat to democracy is because Trump was already president. And we survived. And it's kind of like, all right. But to go to the Biden campaign, and I think Biden is running one of the worst campaigns I've seen in my lifetime. And, and I worked on the Bob Dole, John McCain campaigns, which were fucking dreadful. So I know a bad campaign when I see it. If you go back and if you look at a couple things are absolutely true in American politics. People always think the economy is bad, and that is universally across the board. And Biden arguing that the economy metrics are good when things are costing 20%, 40%, 50%, 100% more than they did 4 years ago. Fuck you. It's not bad. So it doesn't matter what you want to do. I mean, the Dow fell 300 yesterday when I had a heart attack. But so if things are costing you more, under no circumstances are you going to say the economy is good if you're a normal person. So, but put that aside. But that is, people have never thought the economy is better. What successful re-election candidates do, for the most part, is they work, especially in a really fractured, polarized election like this, is they work on 80-20 questions. The best example of this, I think, and probably one of the most brilliant campaigns of my lifetime, was Bill Clinton's 96 reelect. Dick Morris was the architect of it. And Clinton was unpopular, personally not liked. He's became, by the way, scoundrel. Trump, scoundrel, very much of a scoundrel. Everybody knew Bill was having an affairs, and they used to call them bimbo eruptions, and they were paying off women. Fine. What Clinton expertly did is he litigated out a bunch of 80-20 questions on minor policy. One was not minor policy, but policy. One was putting 100,000 more police on the street. Another one was a welfare initiative. Arguably, 100,000 more police in a country of 300 million, I guess, is meaningful, but probably not. But he could also get Bob Dole on the wrong side of that because of votes. Bob Dole voting against budgets. So he took a welfare reform thing and a police thing, both which were individually very popular. Like, we want people to work for their welfare check. Yay, everybody goes, yay. We want more police on the street. Everybody goes, yay. And that's what his reelect campaign was about for a year. He wasn't litigating these giant macro things that people didn't believe. He was litigating these little things. And Biden has a series of little things like credit card fees or airline fees. I mean, it would be the easiest thing in the world to digitally target people that use airlines regularly or semi-regularly or that, and push them on, airline refunds. And that is it's probably a 90-10 question. Instead, the Biden campaign has this need, and I think it is an adolescent need, and I think it's because you don't have adults running the campaign. You've got well-meaning amateurs that want to make him the great man. You become the great man after you win. You're just another schmuck now. You're just another dishonest schmuck now, to your point about you've got to prove you're not a scumbag. And, even if you look at the Reagan 84 reelect, which people remember in ways that it didn't happen, he never said, America is great, we're back, any of that. The language in the advertising is jobs are coming back, hope is coming back, not we are back. And right. It is a totally different argument to say that things are getting better, or these are these micro things that are going to make your life better, and argue about those, as opposed to what the Biden people are doing now. And it is a fundamental misunderstanding of politics and, I think, campaigns. I
think that's a really interesting point, Chris. If I'm hearing you correctly, one loose rule would be, as an incumbent, or at least in this situation, but maybe it's a broader rule as well, as defined by how Clinton ran, is that because people generally are hard to please on a macro level, yep, an incumbent needs to focus on micro things, but an incumbent should focus on the macro things, or a challenger should focus on the macro things, and an incumbent should focus on the micro things. because you can demonstrate I did this, 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 and this in a micro environment. And they're like, oh shit, he's done a lot for us. But on a macro level, if you're Bill Clinton in 92, you can say the economy's horrible, blah, 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 blah. You can hold like no new taxes against HW. Like you can do certain macro things. And if you focus as an incumbent on the micro wins, that tells a larger macro narrative.
Yes, that's 100%. And it takes a fair amount of discipline for a campaign to do that. And Mike Murphy, who's a consultant friend of mine, and he's got a great phrase about running campaigns or working on campaigns. And he says, never fall in love with the meat. And like, you know, if you really like the guy and honor the guy, you go into the campaign with this ruthless gimlet eye thing about what people believe. You can think the guy is a great guy, but you never talk about the guy as a great guy, because ultimately, to your original thing, I just think you're another scumbag until you prove otherwise.
Right.
And
right.
The great thing about the Clinton micro, I'm going to call them micro arguments, is that the world doesn't have to be perfect. You can say, well, you know, I really don't like what Biden has done about inflation. I really don't like what Biden's done about the Middle East, or I really don't like whatever the fuck it is. Pick one. But I really like that I can get a refund now from those scumbag airlines. Or I really like, you know, it's not popular, but it's popping to mind that my student loan got refunded or something. I think that's insane.
Right.
By the way, I think the Trump people are missing an opportunity to litigate that out. I would have been, you know, with the campus protests, I would have said, here's who $1 trillion in refunds are going to, and I would have had crazy people. But
smart.
But I think that
that's it.
Doing
that's
that,
it.
Mike.
Yeah.
Because like 100,000, Bill Clinton saying 100,000 more police on the street is a micro thing, but if a guy wants more cops, I have to believe he's for law and order, which I have to believe makes him care about my safety, which I have to believe makes him care about me. But so here's my other great. I want to do my Bob Dole Clinton thing. So talking about Clinton's great reelect. In 1996, people thought, and true, that Bob Dole was a person of high moral character. He was a war hero. He had integrity, and they thought Bill Clinton was a womanizer who had affairs, who was a liar and a terrible person. They believed all those things. Clinton didn't try to litigate, I'm a really good guy. That was gone. What he litigated was, I wanted 100,000 more police, Bob Dole didn't. I wanted work for the welfare, Bob Dole voted against it. And basically he went where Dole was. And so at the end of the day, people still thought Clinton was a scumbag, but he was our scumbag. And they thought Bob Dole had a lot of integrity, but ideologically and politically, I don't like what he stands for. And so they ran the race they could win, as opposed to the blowjob race, which the Biden people seem to be wanting to do. They want to do the great man race.
Interesting.
And you don't win those races. I mean, once in a while you can do that race. In 84 Reagan, the second part, like the last October of Reagan 84 was the great man thing. But it is such an anomaly. If you go back and look at Obama in 2012, they didn't do the great man thing. They did the micro thing, and that Mitt Romney was a bad guy. But they did all micro stuff. And you know, and again, it is a fundamental, but I think it's like the problem that you have too many people that think politics is the West Wing, and it's not Veep. It's Veep.
Right.
Oh, it's fun. I recommend a movie called In the Loop. It's a movie called In the Loop.
Oh, it's a fucking amazing movie. That's an amazing movie.
Yeah, I mean, the next time I teach a course, I'm going to probably make that required viewing along with Death of Stalin, because I want to say this is the same director, but same writer director, but like he absolutely understands politics. I mean, both of those movies are. It's like they're consultant movies. That and Thank You for Smoking.
Oh, amazing movie.
Yeah, that's another. It's a consultant movie.
Jason Reitman's best movie.
Yeah.
It's such a good movie. It strikes me there's a real opportunity now then, and I guess the micro things have to be true, but
mostly true.
Biden could play up mostly true, right? At least perceivably true. Right?
Perceivably true.
Yeah. If I was on the Biden campaign, you could say something like, we've lowered crime by putting X number of police on the street, by giving X number of dollars to states to do this, and by making sure that a guy that committed 34 felonies in New York went to prison or something. You could like loop him in with it in a cheeky way.
Or you wouldn't even have to say that. You could just say worried about crime.
No.
Under Joe Biden, funding for police, the crime, and if you're talking about crime, and you could make it. Isn't it nice to have a president that you don't have to worry about? Your
right.
Or Joe Biden, he's on the side of people, not criminals, or whatever the fuck it is. I think you can make that implicitly. Mm-hmm. And by the way, when I say perceptive, believably true, you can flip any argument to be a true and a false one. And there's always a downside to any policy, but it has to be again, I call them 80-20 questions. It's things that everybody believes and everybody likes. I'm for the sun coming up. I'm for green grass. I'm for more cops. It's just,
right.
They're the
I mean, truthfully, there's a long way to go. I think you and I shared a text message. I think it was you and I where I said, I feel like presidential elections are like baseball. Nothing matters until October. But so there's a lot of time to go. But I do think that, or what do you think of this? If Biden were to start signing executive orders on the border, on really pushing executive orders on and doing whatever he could on the abortion argument, I think that these are winnable micro things that he could frame that are his winnable moments. The border thing's a little bit difficult because he's going to be framed as doing what had already been done under Trump, basically. But he could say, I'm doing this, and it's the reason I'm doing this is because of XYZ or whatever. But
well, you know what the great
argument? Do you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think abortion is the soft underbelly of Trump, and because I don't think anybody believes that Donald Trump is pro-life, but he is stuck with a pro-life court. So good luck convincing people that I'm not pro-life. But the second thing on the border, reverse all the executive orders, because the argument or the political statement is, I listened to you. Joe Biden says, I listened to you and I changed my policy. And I'm giving you.
Yeah.
But that goes to, I'm not the great man. I'm not dear leader. I'm not the infallible guy. And you would get huge pushback from kind of white, not political people, but White House staff. I guarantee you campaign people would say, so another piece of political lore. 1969, John Lindsay is running for president of New York City. And he was elected in 65 as a Republican, but a fusion. He ran on the Liberal Party and Republican ticket. It's really worth going back and he looked like a movie star, and his first 4 years were a total disaster. Crime went up, school strikes, garbage was piling up on the street. It was terrible. And so John Lindsay's, I don't think it was his first TV ad, but his biggest TV ad that's kind of legendary in political circles is he said, I made mistakes my first term. And basically the spot went something like, everybody makes mistakes, and I certainly did. I was wrong on snow removal. I was wrong on sanitation. I was wrong on this. I was wrong on that. Those were all mistakes, and I own them. But I put more police on the street. I doubled that, and those weren't mistakes. And it was a very compelling argument because A, it meant he was a bit humble. He had done all these micro things that you like, but he took ownership of it. You know, the Clinton people running around saying the economy's great when nobody believes it, it means everything else you are saying isn't true. Whether you want to say we're getting better or we're doing better than Europe or we're the stock market, okay, things are more expensive than they were. It's your fault. That's the end of the argument. Or you can say, here's what I'm doing on inflation, but you can't tell people something they don't believe. And so the Lindsay thing was brilliant, because he said I made mistakes. And everybody went, of course you do. You're human. And it made him likable, and it made him not an asshole. And, and there's too little of that in American politics.
It's interesting. I think this is a good place where we can segue into something I really wanted to touch on, and things that I had built on prior to the Trump news. I want to say this statement, and then we can pivot, which is, it seems to me we are often expecting in this country people to run as a progressive or a liberal, but govern as a conservative. And what I mean by that is that the liberal mindset, at least in the modern version of it, I don't know that it was always this way, but the progressive mind is that everyone is an angel, and we need to treat everyone as angels and speak to the higher angels of our nature and govern to the higher angels of our nature. And we don't really need that many police because everybody's an angel, and we don't need to be prosecuted because they're angels. The only reason they're acting out is because, the system is rigged against them. And so we just need to make everything comfortable for angels. But when it comes to governing, if you do that, what you end up with is San Francisco and Portland and some of these other places where it seems anarchic to, I think that's the right word, anarchic to an environment. It's an anarchic environment. So you must govern as if people are devils, as demons, and you need strictness and you need rigidity and you need to be firm. And so I think running as the enlightened person, but governing as the other, and then showing that. And if you can thread that needle to be perceived as both, which is what Clinton did, then it's the total, like that's the trifecta. That is the you're never going to lose type of situation. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's totally right. And by the way, Portland, they kind of kicked out all their progressives at election last week, and the progressives got crushed because, shockingly, people didn't want people throwing firebombs at police stations.
Right.
As radical as that seems, but it was a really interesting course correction, literally over a 4-year period. They were like, yeah, we tried that, and the governor, I think they passed a initiative to criminalize all kinds of drugs, classifications of drugs, and the governor has since overridden that with executive orders. And you're exactly
hitting on it. So that was my note, was like the end of the progressive prosecutor. The Mike Schmidt was defeated by a prosecutor from his office. Ran against him, a deputy prosecutor, because he was a progressive. We're not going to prosecute nonviolent offenses, which basically all you're saying is that we're going to let you out as many times as it takes for you to eventually commit a violent offense, and then we're going to correct your behavior. It's not the way humanity works, unfortunately, right?
Yeah, there is. What's really interesting is that in Philly, where I'm originally from, the first of the progressive prosecutors is still not particularly popular, but he wins re-elections. and because he's changed course. A lot of these guys haven't changed course on it. And again, he still has the social justice piece of that, but they're now prosecuting minor things. And, the cross pressuring on this stuff is among minority communities, that the system railroad, an 18-year-old black kid or a kind of a down on his luck, not particularly bright Latino guy. And they got sentences that white people never would have done, never would have gotten. It is, you should correct that shit. There's no reason for it. But kind of like broken window stuff and misdemeanors and nuisance crimes and thefts, they don't affect white people in gated communities, and they don't affect white people in where they have they can hire private police. They really affect poor people and minorities the most. And again, nobody wants somebody shitting on their block. I mean, nobody wants. I mean, one of the frustrating things in LA is I go to the CVS, and I gotta get somebody to go fucking open up the case so I can buy shampoo. So by the way, what I do, because it's so annoying, I'll just order it on Amazon. But I mean, but the idea, but the idea,
which then, by the way, destroys the economy of local businesses, and then they wonder why big tech and Amazon is eating the world, because nobody wants to leave their house because you've brought the jungle into the city blocks.
And again, it is a minor inconvenience for me to wait for the associate to come and open the thing, and they're all very nice. I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. I'm on Amazon. I'm getting free shipping. I like to shop. I like to go to the store. What's this product, that product? But like, if like in the middle of my day, or if I'm, it's 5 o'clock and I'm leaving and I want to swing by to pick up a bottle of, Head and Shoulders or whatever the hell I'm using, it's like, I don't want to have to wait 10 minutes because they're busy and this person unlock it. It's like, fuck that. I can go click and I'm done, and I'll get it the next day. And if it's
it's interesting to see it's worth it. It's interesting to see what you brought up Oregon. That has seen a correction towards the center. You had Dexter versus Jayapal. Jayapal lost. I think that was the 3rd district in Oregon. Is it the 5th district where Janelle Bynum beat McLeod Skinner? So she's going to run against Chavez de Reamer. Yeah. So you've seen this course correction kind of towards the center. But in Texas here, what we saw was a state firmly in the grasp of Greg Abbott. I think all but one incumbent, Dave, what's his name? Dave Phelan? Phelan? F-P-H-E-L-A-N. I think it's Phelan. So he was the Speaker of the House, and I honestly, he outperformed our odds. I thought he was going to lose. He should have lost. He barely squeaked out a victory by like 0.3%. But he was the only incumbent to survive in his runoff. I think there were 11 of them, and he was the only one to survive. So, in the next session, we're going to have school choice vouchers throughout the state. That's going to pass. That's Greg Abbott's like signature thing. But I also think that this represents a more MAGA-friendly side of the wing. So it seems that the left is reverting to the mean. They're reverting to the center. But on the right, I don't think that the right is ready to revert to the center. I think that they're still pushing farther right. I mean, there is one, before you answer, there is one in Texas here specifically. What was his name? Tony Gonzalez up in Fort Worth.
Right.
He won, and he was an incumbent. And there was also Craig Goldman is a moderate, also I think he's also in the DFW area, who was a moderate who's moving from the state to the U.S. Congress and outperformed a challenger on the far right. But other than those two, certainly in Texas, the far right has coalesced and is moving further right.
Yeah, and what you'll see, I think ultimately, I think this is a good thing for the body politic, and you see it in Oregon. I mean, Oregon was a kind of a Republican state that became a moderate state for decades, and then it became a liberal state, and then it became a crazy state, and now it's moving back. And I think that you will see that, and it's simply because it's like that's where the center of gravity is. And I'm going to compare Pennsylvania to Texas among Republicans. And I was talking to a super duper smart Texas operative, a guy named Mac Macoiak, who's out of the Austin area, who's brilliant, and we were comparing notes. And Pennsylvania for decades was the center of this moderate republicanism, and the quality of candidates we had for Republicans were incredible. They were all like serious adults, and you would have county commissioners who would be U.S. senators in most states. Republicans gained power, and they gained power for a fairly long time, and the legislature, through good campaigns and gerrymandering, becomes this Republican kind of machine thing, and we win judicial races and blah blah blah. The party keeps moving right, and now it's in fucking crazy land, and they lose. I mean, they get crushed on their governorships. They get crushed in the last U.S. They lose the last U.S. Senate race to a guy that was, basically in a coma, Fetterman. They lose all the judicial races. They get wiped out. They get wiped out fucking everywhere because they nominated fucking crazy people. And they're going to continue to lose as long as they nominate crazy people. And so I think you're going to see that arc in Texas, because if you look at some of the statewide things that, Trump won Texas by what, 3.7 or almost 4 in 20. That's okay. Cruz barely beat Beto, in his election by 1. This is a state that you think, this is all red, but that's not what the evidence shows. And right. The same thing with Georgia. Right. I mean, 8 years ago, you go Georgia, blood red. Well, they got, if you look at all, it's not, and for a lot of different reasons. Right. But part of it is that, you nominate fucking stupid candidates or bad candidates, and voters punish.
Do you think Cruz is going to lose the call in all red?
I think it should be our premier race, and I would do Cruz +1, because there's also a libertarian on the ballot. There's a libertarian on the ballot, which I think Democrats are going to kind of want to fund. So if I'm just going to make this up. So Trump won Texas by 4 in 20, right? 3.9 or 3.7 or some damn thing like that. Generally, he's leading the ticket, and everybody else is -5 from that. So let's say Trump wins by 7. That essentially means that Cruz, if all the numbers hold, should win by 2. The Libertarian candidate, if properly funded, will pull 1.5 to 2.5. If he pulls 2.5, Cruz loses. If he pulls 1.5, he sneaks one out. So I think that should be it's a really interesting race. And, I don't know if the Cruz people are scared, but when I look at the math, I would be petrified.
Yeah.
And again,
that's interesting.
So, and if Cruz loses, there's no way Republicans get the Senate. And, right. And so all of a sudden it becomes a premier race. What you really want to be is the media consultant for both of those campaigns, because you're going to be visiting Porsche dealers regularly.
Got it. All right. I agree. I think the Cruz one it's going to squeak out one way or the other. It's going to be very close.
Yeah, and as a Republican in Texas, you should never lose a race. I mean, demographically, you should not lose a race.
Presumably,
Presumably, like
presumably, yeah,
like
yeah,
like if you are a Republican in Pennsylvania, it was difficult to lose a race. If you're a Republican in Georgia, it's difficult to lose a race. But these people have gotten so
yeah. Right.
crazy. And again, I mean, and what I'm going to call this kind of self proclaimed libertarian Republicans, which they aren't. I mean,
Yeah.
they're
Right.
they're, they're nationalists. They're
Right.
and but like that crazy wing, and there's like right under the surface of that is this anti-Semitism and racism and general
Mm,
conspiracy nutland shit.
mm,
Voters don't want any part of that. It's like
yeah.
over Memorial Day, I was watching Band of Brothers, which is a crazy
Yeah.
great TV series,
Great
and
series.
and these guys did like hard work, incredible odds, and they came home and they built roads and schools, and all they wanted to do was live in a nice house, have a decent job, watch the ball game, and have the occasional beer, right? Because they'd done all the
Right.
fucking work. So like, no
Right.
wonder they hated hippies. No wonder they hated student protesters, right? And it's like,
Right.
and on a very minor level, that's what voters are with ideologues, on the left in
Right.
Portland or in Texas. I don't have time for that
Right.
shit. I need to do stuff.
Yeah, I totally see the point and agree kind of with the mind space of the World War II generation. I will say, however, if they kept their ears open a little bit, I don't think that those hippies and Vietnam protesters were. I think that they've aged pretty well with the way what we know now. And I think what I try to remind myself of is rather than seeing things as individual, seeing it as a system. And our country as a system, I believe, needs progressives to push forward and conservatives to pull us back so that we moderate in that middle, so that we are pursuing this, but we're slowing down and we're doing it in a way where we don't speed too far ahead too fast.
Yeah.
So when I look at it that way, I see like, oh, okay, these protesters in Colombia over that are chanting for Hamas, while it doesn't make sense and is abhorrent to me that you would think that that makes sense. I see, okay, well, what are they maybe at a deeper level saying? What are they, and then the reaction to that, I also see serves a purpose, which is like, yeah, you kids, you're pushing us forward and you think it's a social justice thing, but there's also this other aspect. So let's moderate in the middle. So I think that I value both sides of it.
Yeah, but you understand
as a system. Our system requires it.
But you understand the antipathy too, which was kind of my point.
For sure.
Is that
for sure.
100%. And that's like, no wonder they fucking hated them.
Right.
And again, but it needs to be like this, and that's kind of
right.
It's like I'm always amazed. I'm always amazed in presidential off-year elections when the party in power doesn't do well, and I'm like, have you guys missed like a fucking 100 years of elections? It's like, I mean, literally, it's Trump the Apprentice. You're fired.
Right.
I never knew that. Anyway, we should wrap this up, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, let me throw out to you really quickly. What is your over under Eleanor Holmes Norton in the DC Democratic delegate primary next Tuesday? What do you have? I have the over under 86.65%. You're going to take over or under?
Over.
Oh shit. Okay, we have it too low. Yeah. Over. All right, we'll see how that pans out. We have a couple contests up now. We can check them out. Thanks,
Great.
Chris. We'll wrap up. See you next week.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye.